Here begins videotape number 1 of the deposition of Alan Cole Burks, M.D., the matter of Dennis Allen et al. Versus Alan Burks, M.D. et al. In the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. Case number 24C15003384MM. Today's date is December 22nd, 2015. The time on the video monitor is 10:40 a.m. The video operator today is Frank Holmes. The video deposition is taking place at Pullman USA St. Louis office, 10 South Broadway, Suite 1400, St. Louis, Missouri 63102. Counsel, please identify yourselves and state whom you represent.
Rodney M. Gaston. I represent the estate of Dennis Allen, his wife, and his surviving children.
Ronald Shaw. I represent Dr. Alan Burks and University of Maryland Medical System.
The court reporter today is Gene Priskew of DTI Court Reporting Solutions. Would the reporter please swear in the witness?
Doctor, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Doctor, would you please state your full name and business address?
Alan Cole Burks. My current address is 660 South Euclid Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri, 63110.
Okay. Doctor, have you ever had your deposition taken before?
No, sir.
Okay. Because this is your first time, I just want to review some ground rules with you so we can have an accurate recording of the question and answering today. The court reporter is here to take down my questions and your answers, and although this matter is also being videotaped, all of your responses have to be verbal. We can't take a shake of the head or a nod. Also, in order that we get an accurate record, I'll ask that you wait until after I finish asking my question before you start to answer. I know you probably have already anticipated some of the questions, and it's normal in normal everyday conversation. People interrupt each other all the time, but for this deposition, if you could just be patient and wait till I finish asking the question before you answer, and I'll try not to interrupt your answer. Also, if I ask you a question that you don't understand for any reason, tell me immediately, and I'll try to rephrase the question. Otherwise, if you don't, we will assume that you've understood the question and you've answered it appropriately. Also, if at any time you need to take a break, just let us know. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. All right, Dr. O'Shea, what's been marked as exhibit number 1, which is the notice for today's deposition. And I want to focus on the list of documents that are contained in Schedule A. We've asked you to produce 19 such documents, and I'm wondering if you could tell me what documents you brought with you today, and your attorney can assist you with that if need be.
Do you have an extra copy of that?
I have my copy. You can follow along if you want to just go through item number 1.
So, as far as any medical records, he doesn't have any personal possession of any medical records. These are all from the University of Maryland Medical System.
All right. And Doctor, do you have with you today, either a hard copy or on your computer, the medical records for Mr. Dennis Allen's admission to University Hospital on March 11, 2013?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you reviewed, other than those records, have you reviewed any other medical records or any other documents in preparation for your deposition today?
Well, let me object to the extent that he has reviewed things that are protected by attorney-client privilege that are not medical records. So I ask you not to reference any of those, but anything that you reviewed that's not protected by attorney-client privilege, such as medical records, you can respond to.
Certainly. I've not reviewed Mr. Allen's previous hospitalization records in as much depth, but I would have reviewed them at the time of his admission in March 2013.
Did you take a look at those at some time between the time you received notice of the lawsuit and today's date?
Honestly, no, sir.
Okay. All right. And how about a review of any of the pleadings in this case, the complaint, your answers to interrogatories, the responses, your responses to our request for admissions of fact, have you also looked at those items?
Well, I'm going to object. I'm going to let him answer whether he's looked at those, but I'm not going to let him offer any testimony about this because he's only looked at those with me, which would constitute attorney work product and attorney-client privilege.
I just want to know if you've looked at your answers to interrogatories.
Yes, sir, I have.
And have you also looked at your response to our request for admissions of fact?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay. Now, have you reviewed any other medical articles, textbooks, treatises, or other medical literature in preparation for your deposition today?
Objection to the extent that calls for attorney-client privilege information, but you can answer anything outside that.
No, sir, not outside of my discussions with Mr. Shaw.
Okay. Well, I don't want to know what your discussions with Mr. Shaw were because they're protected. But if in preparation for your deposition you have reviewed or looked at on the internet any medical literature, any articles, textbooks, journals in preparation for your deposition, I'd like to know what you reviewed.
Again, I object because I do think that constitutes attorney work product and attorney-client privilege. So I'm going to instruct him not to answer that question as phrased.
Are you going? Can you tell me what documents you've looked at on the computer, what medical literature you've looked at on the computer in preparation for your deposition?
No, I object. The only thing that he can talk about is the FDA 2009 publication, or whatever you want to call that, submission. He has looked at that.
And what else did you look at?
I object. Instruct him not to answer.
When you prepared your answers to interrogatories, in preparing the answers, did you base your answers upon any medical articles, textbooks, journals, anything of that nature?
You can answer.
I base my answers on my previous medical training and experience to that point.
So is it fair to say that when you answered your interrogatories, you did not base your answers upon any medical articles, journals, or textbooks?
No, sir, I can't agree with that.
Okay. When you prepared your answers to interrogatories, can you tell me what medical articles, journals, or textbooks you relied upon when you prepared your answers to interrogatories?
That would be a very broad answer, very difficult scope to respond to that because it involves 4 years of medical training, innumerable number of books and articles that went into the attainment of my medical degree.
Can you point any one particular medical article, journal, or textbook that you relied upon, if you did, when you answered your interrogatories?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Did you bring any other documents with you that are listed in the Schedule A?
He brought his, well, we sent you his curriculum vitae.
Exhibit number 5, is this a current copy of your resume or CV, Dr. Burks?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
As far as number 8, copies of any demonstrative evidence and exhibits, the only thing we have at this point would be the medical records that he's going to rely on.
All right.
There is no correspondence between him and any subsequent treating physicians. The only documents that he has, which are not in his possession but in my possession, responsive to your request for production of documents, would be the medical records and the CV. We forwarded you the answers to interrogatories, his answers to interrogatories that have been executed. We didn't bring an extra copy, but I assume you have those.
I do have them here. All right, Dr. Burks, let me show you what's been marked as exhibit number 2. These, and I'll see if you can identify these documents.
These are a copy of my answers to the plaintiff's interrogatories.
Okay, and I think on the last page of those answers, did you sign that, attesting that under the penalties of perjury that the answers were true and accurate based upon your knowledge, information, and belief?
Yes, sir.
Are there any changes you want to make to those answers to interrogatories before I start asking questions about those?
None that have not already been forwarded to you by Mr. Shaw.
Okay, that's the only set that I have. And if there's another set that's been sent to me since last Friday and today on the answers to interrogatories, I don't have them.
No, it's just the only set. I
That's
think
it.
we went back, attorney-client privilege, we went back and forth a number of times to make sure everything was complete. That's what he's talking about. But the final set is, there's only one final set that he's executed.
So long as these are that final set, then I don't have any additional.
May I take
I've
a
been
look at
told
them?
they are. I'll
I
let
think
your counsel confirm that for us.
If they were sent to you on Friday, that's the final set.
It's the only set that I have.
Okay, that's the final set.
All right, thank you. Okay, do you have any other documents that we requested in Schedule 1?
After he prepared his answers to interrogatories, there were a couple things in request for admissions that we supplemented. Did you get a copy of the supplemental responses to requests for admissions?
After close of business Friday, I did,
Okay,
and I have those with me here.
all right. I think there were just 3 or 4 different requests that our subsequent investigation led us to make a change in their response.
I'll be
So-
asking about that shortly.
Okay. As far as documents reviewed by the defense experts, we haven't gotten to the point to name defense experts yet, but typically all we send would be medical records. He would not be in possession of any correspondence between him and the defense experts. He doesn't have anything about any legal documents about legal entities. That would be University of Maryland, so if you need a corporate designee, sometime we can take care of that. There was no contract or agreement between him and University of Maryland Medical System. Copies of any documents relate to the existence or dissolution of any defendant. That would not apply to him. Copies of any liability insurance policies. He doesn't have possession of that. That would be something we'd have to take up with University of Maryland Medical System. But I've been advised that there is more than adequate insurance to cover all of the
That's what I wanted to
initial
see,
claims.
the declaration page of the self-insurance documents.
He doesn't have that, so the University of Maryland
Yeah,
would
but-
have
well,
that.
Okay.
And copies of any policies or protocols or procedures, the University of Maryland Hospital, University of Maryland Medical Center. We just sent you the order sheet for hyperkalemia.
All right, Doctor, I'll show you what's been marked as exhibit number 4. I'll ask if you can identify those 2 pages for me.
This is the electronic order set, or what's known as a care set, for the treatment of hyperkalemia from the medical record, or the electronic medical system of University of Maryland Medical System.
And this was in effect at the time Mr. Allen was under your care in March of 2013. Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Doctor, I also asked if you could provide copies of any policies, protocols, or procedures in effect at University of Maryland which you followed for the care you provided to Mr. Allen. As of this date, exhibit number 4 is the only policy, procedure, or protocol that you followed. Can you tell me if you followed any other policies, protocols, or procedures in place at the hospital when you treated Mr. Allen for your treatment of Mr. Allen?
Are you asking about written
Right.
policies that were reduced to writing or in general?
First, written policies.
No other written policies to my knowledge.
Okay. Are there any other non-written policies, standard that you followed in your custom and practice at the University of Maryland Hospital when you provided treatment for Mr. Allen?
So let me object as to the form of that question. If you can answer if you understand.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by unwritten policies.
Sometimes there are policies at the hospital that everybody follows just because they've been doing it for years, but they're not written down. Doctors follow a particular set of rules, procedures when they do consultations, who they talk to, who they report to, things of that nature. Can you tell me generally if there are any such policies to that extent that you followed in this case?
Well, I object as to the form of that because my concern is how he differentiates what his protocols are that he follows versus the hospitals. So that's my concern. But go ahead, you can answer.
I operated under the procedures that I had learned throughout my medical training, which to my knowledge did not differ from any unspoken culture or policies at the University of Maryland.
Okay. And how did you end up at the University of Maryland Hospital?
How do you mean?
Well, was it right out of medical school? Did you do your internship, your residency program there? How did you get to University of Maryland?
Well, so my road to the University of Maryland, I guess, began at St. Louis University School of Medicine, from which I graduated in 2007 with an MD. From there, I participated in the match into a family medicine residency program through the St. Louis University in Belleville, Illinois. It was a 3-year program, after which I sat for and passed my family medicine board exams. From then, I took a position as a second-year resident in internal medicine at Georgetown University Hospital. Completed 2 years of residency there. The American Board of Internal Medicine granted me credit for 1 year, given my board certification in family medicine, to allow me to sit for the internal medicine boards, which I did in 2012 and passed. Following that, I then took a position at the University of Maryland Medical Center as a instructor of medicine and hospitalist in the medical intermediate care unit.
Okay, hang on a second. Did you just say you took a position at University of Maryland Hospital?
The University of Maryland Medical Center.
Okay. What about your fellowship? When did you do your fellowship program in pulmonary and critical care?
I'm currently doing that. From the University of Maryland in 2013, I began, July of 2013, I began my pulmonary and critical care fellowship here at Washington University in St. Louis.
Okay. So you were board certified in family medicine and in internal medicine at the time you provided care to Mr. Allen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you're waiting to sit for your critical care medicine boards next year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Now, and when did you, I'm sorry, when was the month and year that you came to University of Maryland Medical Center? Is that July 2012?
I believe it would be July 2012 is the effective start date.
To June 2013?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you were you held the position of clinical instructor of medicine, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was that internal medicine, pulmonary medicine, critical medicine?
It was internal medicine, the Department of Internal Medicine.
All All right, can you tell me what your teaching roles was at the hospital? How many days were you in the classroom, et cetera?
My teaching roles were clinical only, and my exposure to various residents, be it internal medicine residents, anesthesia, preliminary, other preliminary interns, were via bedside instruction when a patient would be transferred from the general medical floor or ward to our medical intermediate care unit.
Okay. And can you tell me what your schedule was for the year you were at University of Maryland Medical Center?
The shifts that we would do would be from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. We typically did these in block scheduling, anywhere between 4 and 6 days. Typically, and our blocks of nights would typically range between 3 and 5 consecutive nights.
Okay. And after you did your shift, were you on call for a period of time, or were you excused until you had to come back in for your next shift?
We were, at the end of our shift, we were off until the next shift. There was no call requirements.
Okay. All right. And do you know how many residents were under your supervision on any particular day?
In our unit specifically, we did not have residents that cared for the patients along with us. Our exposure to residents were when we would go to the floor, evaluate their patients who needed a higher level of care, and then discuss with them the findings and do our teaching then, and then we would accept them into the intermediate care unit.
Okay, you just lost me. Normally, if you're in charge of residents, there's so many residents that go with you from patient to patient to patient when you do rounds.
Correct.
Is that the type of residency program that you were supervising at University of Maryland Hospital?
I did not have direct supervision over residents during my time there, where
Okay.
they would report to me regarding the care of the patients.
Okay, so you had no supervisory role over any residents who may have went along with you during your rounding, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did someone else in the department have that supervisory responsibility?
No one else who attended on the medical intermediate care unit had those responsibilities.
Okay. Sometimes, I understand the residency program, the resident will come in and do their evaluation, and they have to work under a supervising physician. Did you ever play that role of a supervisory physician for a resident at University of Maryland Hospital?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay. When you first went to work for University of Maryland Hospital in June of 2012, did the hospital provide you with a manual containing policies and procedures for internal medicine doctors?
I'm trying to remember specifically. I know typically that's the practice to give a policy manual. Those manuals are typically internal policies regarding transfer of patients and things like that, but no policies or regulations regarding the medical care provided to me, if that's what you mean.
Do you remember if you received any policies when you first became employed at University of Maryland?
Again, written policies, I assume.
Right, written policies.
Written policies about the internal workings of the University of Maryland Medical Center.
Okay. How about any internal policies, procedures, or guidelines pertaining to the care of patients?
None regarding specific medical care for patients. No, not that I recall.
Okay. What you provided me today was in exhibit number 4.
Yes, sir.
Is an order set for hyperkalemia.
Yes, sir.
If you weren't provided those written policies for this order set, how did you become aware that there were such order sets for treatment of patients with particular medical conditions?
Via use of the electronic medical record. For the physician order entry system, you can type in a search word for the specific treatment or condition that you're wanting to treat, and then that will develop a list of potential options to use. And if an order set exists to expedite that treatment, it will be one of the options to use.
Okay. So if you type in the word sepsis or rhabdomyolysis or hyperkalemia, will order set pop up for you for your easy reference?
For hyperkalemia, yes, as evidenced by this exhibit, I guess, number 4. I don't recall if there was a specific one for sepsis. I don't believe there's one for rhabdomyolysis.
Do you know if there were any other specific order sets for any of the conditions that Dennis Allen had when he was under your care, other than the order set for hyperkalemia?
No, sir.
Okay. And for the order sets, do you know if they're approved by individual departments in the hospital, or whether it is a global approval of an order set?
I don't know the specific mechanism for approval of order sets at the University of Maryland Medical Center.
Did you ever serve on any committee or have any input into the creation or implementation of any order sets while you were a physician at University of Maryland Hospital?
No, sir.
Is the order set a guideline for physicians with respect to the treatment of a patient with a particular medical condition?
I wouldn't refer to it as a guideline. It's a set that contains the accepted options in the standard of care for a given condition. And then it's up to the physician to choose which of those treatments they utilize for the patient.
Can a physician such as yourself go outside of the order set and recommend a plan of care that the physician himself feels is appropriate for the patient?
Let me object this to the form, but you can answer.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In this order set for hyperkalemia, which you have in front of you as exhibit number 4, I don't see dialysis as a treatment for hyperkalemia on the order set. Do you?
No, sir.
Can you tell me why? I mean, in your medical profession, before you went to University of Maryland Hospital, were you aware that dialysis is a form of treatment for a patient who has hyperkalemia?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you tell me why that doesn't appear on the order set?
Because dialysis is a special procedure that is ordered only by nephrologists, and in special circumstances, intensive care physicians. Therefore, it would not appear on an order set.
Help me to understand that. If dialysis is a known and accepted treatment for hyperkalemia, why is it missing off of the order set? I'm just not understanding how the use of the order set is implemented or used by physicians such as yourself, as opposed to nephrologists.
This order set is a set of orders that are available to me that I can order myself. For dialysis, that would rely on a nephrologist to physically order themselves. So I don't have the privilege, or to use a hospital term, I don't have the permission to order dialysis on my own. Therefore, it would not show up in an order set.
Is that a hospital policy, or is that an accepted prohibition in the medical field?
Objection as to form, you can answer.
To the extent that I understand the question, I would say both.
Well, were you Mr. Allen's attending physician?
Yes, sir.
Did you serve the role as his critical care physician?
No, sir.
Okay. Is there anyone else other than you who served the role as a critical care physician for Mr. Allen?
After the date in question, after I believe it was on March 19th.
We're talking about before March 19th.
Before March 19th, he did not have an indication for a critical care physician.
So
Therefore, no.
would it be fair to say that the person who was in charge for managing his overall condition and course of treatment from the time you first saw him up until March 19th would be you?
Objection. He's already talked about the times that he was working or not working.
He lost me. Do you understand the question?
Well, I think I understand the question, but I think it's the answer, for specific dates, I can say yes.
Okay.
There are dates where I was off service. I was not attending on them at that time, and there was another physician who was acting as his sole attending.
I understand.
That was my concern.
I'll ask another question. According to the medical record, there were times when you were caring for Mr. Allen between the time of his admission on March 11th and March 19th. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
For those times that you were in the hospital and caring for him, was there any other doctor other than you for those particular times that was responsible for the management of his medical care?
Objection. You can answer.
After my shift is over at 7 p.m., I hand off my patients to one of my colleagues that is working the night shift that night, the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., at which time I would give a verbal and written handout and sign out to him or her. And then they would be responsible for those 12 hours, at which time that's over. I would then return. They would inform me of the events, if any, that happened overnight with my patients, and I would resume care at that time.
Right. But my question was, for those times when you were actually in the hospital and caring for him, you would be the person in charge of his medical care. Would that be a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Okay. Now, you said there was a written sign-out sheet that you prepare at the conclusion of your shift to advise the oncoming internal medicine of the patient's condition?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me, is that part of the chart, or is there a special written sign-out sheet that you fill out that you give to the oncoming attendant? It's not in the chart.
That is not part of the chart or electronic medical record.
Okay, how would we find those documents?
That I don't know.
All right. What did you do with them after you wrote them?
Well, typically because things change from day to day, oftentimes those documents would be shredded because it would contain sensitive medical record, or would be put into a shred bin, because what was the sign out for one day is not necessarily applicable to the next.
I don't understand how medical records get shredded. Let me ask you another question. When you come on for your shift, do you get a written sign-out sheet from the attending who you are relieving for that patient?
I do.
What do you do with those documents?
I maintain them on my person until the end of the shift, at which time I will put them in the shred bin and create a new document based on the events of that day and give them to the oncoming physician. Those documents are not part of the medical record.
And it's your understanding that the policies and procedures in place at University of Maryland Hospital required you to shred the written sign-out sheets that are given to you by doctors who you relieve for the care of your patients?
Could you repeat the question?
Right. How do you know to shred them?
Because they contain sensitive medical information, and therefore it would be a HIPAA violation not to.
I know, but the patient's medical chart contains confidential medical information protected by HIPAA. What I'm trying to understand is, why do you shred those documents and no other documents?
Because the same information that's contained in those documents that we hand off from physician to physician is attainable in the medical record. There's no extra information in those documents that's not already in the medical record. And that is an easy reference for the physician that's on. It's not a specific one sheet for each patient. There's multiple patients' information on a single document, a single piece of paper that we can use as a quick reference in the event that a nurse calls with a specific question. We can refer to that list to help answer those questions and to tell us, this is something we need to look out for. This is something that we're concerned about, and then so that we have a list of things to do, rather than have to refer to the entire medical record every time. So it's a supplement to a verbal discussion about the patient.
But when you say that the written notes do not contain anything that's not in the patient's chart, that's your practice, correct?
I don't know that I understand the question.
Okay. You just testified that the written handoff, written notes you get, sign-outs, are not different from anything else that's contained in the patient's chart, correct?
Correct.
All right, that's your practice. What I want to know is, how do you know what the practices of all the other doctors are to be able to say that there's nothing different in the chart from what they hand you? I know it's what you do, but how do you know what every other internal medicine doctor at the hospital does with respect to the written sign-out sheets?
Objection as to form, you can answer.
That I don't know. I don't know how they operate independently.
Fair enough.
That would be a cultural.
If you don't know, that's a perfectly okay answer. I just
No, unless if you wanted to finish, did you have a? I don't want you to cut him off. If you were done with your answer, or.
Well, I would just say I don't know that, every physician operates within their own set of what they consider to be right, and I have got no control over that. Again, as the list that we provide each other is merely a supplement to a verbal sign-out. Obviously, if there's any questions whatsoever, you trust but verify by going to the official medical record where that same information would be obtained.
Can you tell me, when you were treating Mr. Allen, how many other patients were under your care for any particular shift? If you can give me your best estimate.
I believe the unit had 16 beds on it, and during the day those patients would be divided amongst 2 attending physicians, so it would on average be 8.
Okay. Now, were all the patients located on one floor or one centralized unit?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on any given day, you should have been responsible for the maximum of 8 patients in your 12-hour shift.
That all depends on if a patient has improved, their condition had improved to the point that they could either be discharged or transferred to another unit, then it's possible that I may care for more than 8 patients in a given day, because I may then accept another patient into the unit. You see what I'm saying? So I may start the day with 8 patients. One of them may leave, and then I'll meet a new patient, and then at that point the number would be 9 that I would have cared for that given shift.
All right. Did it get everyone more than 9?
I'm sorry?
Did it ever exceed more than 9 on a particular shift?
I guess if you're asking if I've ever taken care of or met more than 9 patients in a given shift, then the answer would be yes.
What's the maximum?
12 would be the most.
Okay. Now, when you start your shift in the morning at 7 o'clock, can you tell me generally how the day progresses normally, who you meet with, then when do you do your rounding, when you meet with consulting physicians, etc.? A brief overview, nothing real specific, but I just sort of want to know how your day shapes up.
So we would come in at between 6:30 and 7, meet with the outgoing physician, the physician whose shift was ending, have a discussion about the old patients, any new patients that may have been admitted overnight, and then spend time reviewing records as labs would begin to come back during that time through the computer system. On our unit, we had a social worker whose office was adjacent to ours. We would sit and discuss plans of care with our social worker. Actually, I misspoke. He was not a social worker. He was an RN that I'm forgetting the specific job title, but
Case manager?
Case manager. Exactly. Thank you.
Go ahead.
And so we would meet with him and discuss any issues that may arise as far as discharge home and things like that. And then there would be about a 2-hour period where we would go and see each individual patient, talk with them about how they're feeling, about their condition, examine them, review their telemetry strips, their cardiac monitors, and then at approximately 10 o'clock, 10 or 11, we would then do what we called interdisciplinary rounds, where our case manager would be present, the nurses for each individual patient would be present, the physician would be present. We often tried to have a dietitian available as well. And we would then go from bed to bed and discuss any outstanding issues that may not have come up during our individual evaluations.
Is it your practice before you begin your rounds in the morning of the patient, separate from the interdisciplinary rounds, that you review the patient's medical chart to find out what happened to them during the time that you were off the shift before?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when do you make your written entries into the computer or your handwritten notes following your initial rounding of the patients in the morning?
That varies day to day, depending on the conditions of the patients, how much time is available to do it. So it may be as early as noon, it may be as late in the evening as before I sign out to the oncoming physician.
Okay. And when you enter the information in the computer, do you put the time that you made the entry?
Yes.
Okay.
The time that the time that the note is written is the time that goes on the note.
Okay. So it does not correlate with the time that you actually saw the patient.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any way to know from those written notes the time that you actually saw the patient versus the time you made the entry into the written chart?
Depending on the events of the day, it could be possible.
Okay.
In the event that there was an unexpected issue that may have arose, an important family discussion that warranted documentation, an adverse event, something like that, it is my practice to try to write a note shortly after that time, which would more closely correlate with the time that I saw the patient.
Okay. For example, if your note starts at 11 o'clock a.m. and at the end it says I spent 30 minutes with the patient, that 30-minute time period would have to be before 11 o'clock a.m., correct?
Correct, and it may not mean that it's a 30-minute consecutive time block. It's if you're referring to a specific entry in the medical record, if any time that there's a physician writes 30 minutes spent or 45 minutes spent, that's an estimation of the time that it took to complete the evaluation and make the medical decisions.
So that's not a consecutive running of time, that's just an accumulation of the amount of minutes that the doctor spent with the patient up to and before the time they made the note of the chart?
Correct.
Okay, so it's not that you were in Mr. Allen's room from 10 o'clock to 10:30 and Ryder spent 30 minutes. That would be an inaccurate reading of that note.
Objection. You can answer.
If it says 30 minutes spent, that does not necessarily mean that that entire 30 minutes was spent within the room. That it was an amount of time spent caring for the patient, meaning reviewing other records, speaking with other physicians, arranging the care of the patient.
Is there any way to know from your memory or from the review of the chart how much time you actually spent in Mr. Allen's room on any particular rounding for him? Any way to know?
Could you rephrase or ask the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. What I'm trying to say, if your note says I spent 30 minutes, 45 minutes with the patient, is there any way to note how many minutes of those minutes were actually spent in the room talking with the patient?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Now, we're up to the point of the interdisciplinary rounding.
Mm-hmm.
Once you conclude that, I mean, do you have lunch sometime in there?
Yes, if time allows, we'll try to grab lunch, and oftentimes one of the two physicians will go and get their lunch, bring it back to the office. Our office was on the unit for which we cared for, and therefore we would kind of have a working lunch, so to speak. That's how all of our lunches went.
So would it be fair to say if at any time during the shift that one of your patients developed an emergency, that you would be readily available to address that?
Well, unless I was down getting food
Except
or
for
evaluating another patient off of the floor, there was always a physician available to tend to an emergency issue.
Okay, so if you weren't available, your other, quote, partner who was working with you the same day would be able to step in your stead?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Now, when you say evaluating a patient off the floor, under what circumstances would you be called off of your floor to evaluate another patient?
If a patient were to be worsening on the ward, on the general ward, and need a higher level of care, which means to be more closely watched and have a lower nursing ratio, then I would go and evaluate to decide, is that appropriate? Do we have the room for them? Is there something we can do to improve their condition immediately? And then either accept them or, say perhaps they're too sick for our unit, they should go to the ICU.
Okay. And is your unit intermediate care unit?
Yes, sir.
It's a step up from the regular floor, but a step down from intensive care?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you actually serve not only as the attending for the patients who are on your floor, but as a consulting doctor for patients who are on a level of care below your intermediate care unit. Would that be a fair statement?
At times, if the team felt it was necessary.
Okay. All right. And then would you approve the admission of that patient to your intermediate care unit if you felt the condition warranted it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In your unit, I understand from reading the records that Mr. Allen was able to receive dialysis actually in his own room. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So did you often have dialysis patients in the intermediate care unit where you worked?
I often had patients who required dialysis in our intermediate care unit.
Okay. Was there any criteria in place that indicated whether a patient was to have dialysis in his or her room or whether the patient was sent to the dialysis unit in the hospital?
Typically, that was based on the patient's clinical stability and the nephrologist's discretion.
Is it my understanding that you are not allowed to order dialysis for any of the patients who are under your care in the intermediate care unit?
That's correct. I could not directly myself order dialysis without consulting with a nephrologist.
Were the nephrologists available 24/7?
Not inside the hospital, but they were available via pager call.
If you're working a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, 2 o'clock in the morning, a patient develops an emergency, and you determine that they need dialysis right away, stat, and they can't wait, what would you do?
I would call and speak with the nephrologist, which would be a fellow on call, and explain to them the situation and that I felt the patient needed emergent dialysis.
And I presume you worked on Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays.
Yes, sir.
If you determined that a patient needed urgent dialysis on a stat basis on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, and a nephrologist who you called and spoke with agreed, could that be accomplished?
That I don't know with certainty, because I don't have any control over the dialysis machines or the dialysis nurses. That would depend on the nephrologists and the nephrology department and who they had available.
Is it your testimony that you can't tell me today whether the entire year that you worked at University of Maryland Hospital, whether if you believed the patient needed dialysis on a stat basis on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, that the nephrology department could or could not accommodate your request?
I would say, to clarify my previous answer, I'd say that the understanding would be that it would be available, but as with most things that have multiple moving parts, there are times that it may not be available for whatever reason. Either the on-call dialysis nurse is for whatever reason unavailable, or they themselves have an issue, they can't come in. It may become an issue where it's not available, and I've got no control over that.
I understand that those things you have no control over, but as far as you know, if the hospital has the staffing available, that if you needed a patient to be dialysized on a stat basis during 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, that could be accomplished.
The expectation would be that that could be accomplished. The definition of what you mean by stat or emergent, that time frame, again, is going to be variable.
Okay, so to the best of your recollection, there was no notice that you were aware of or announcement that you were aware of that said, we can't dialyze patients on Saturday, Sunday, or holidays. Would that be a fair statement?
That's correct.
Okay, now, if you determine the patient needs dialysis, it's on a non-stat basis, and you speak with a nephrologist and he agrees, for that patient, what is your estimated time that the patient could begin dialysis?
Could you be more specific?
Sure. If you go into a patient's room and you conclude from the clinical presentation, from reviewing the lab works, that this patient needs dialysis, you call a nephrologist, they agree. But it's not an urgent or stat request. What is the estimated time that you believe that that patient should begin dialysis once those decisions have been made?
Depending on machine and staffing availability, it could begin anywhere between 1 hour and 8 hours on a non-urgent basis. Depends on how full the dialysis unit is, if they have available machines.
Is there a difference between an urgent request for a dialysis and stat request, or do you consider them to be the same?
In my opinion, they are essentially the same.
Okay. When you make a determination that one of your patients needs dialysis urgently or on a stat basis, and you're able to reach the nephrologist and he agrees, At what point do you expect dialysis to begin for that patient?
Objection as to form, you can answer.
I'd expect it to, within a range, I'd expect it to begin anywhere from 1 hour to 4 hours. And that's based on experience and, again, the knowledge of the way availability works and how what it takes to mobilize something like that.
Okay. And the nephrologist would be able to provide you with a better estimate for the start time. Would that be a fair statement?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Again, if they're not if they may not be immediately knowledgeable of their availability of nurses and of machines, so they may not be able to say this will begin at a X time.
Well, do you at least discuss the time when your patient can begin dialysis if it's on a stat basis with the nephrologist who you consult with?
Yes.
So at the end of the consultation, you have a pretty good idea when nephrology can begin dialysizing your patient, correct?
Not
Objection as to
necessarily.
form.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Not necessarily.
How come?
Again, because of all of the unknowns, and I've rarely had anyone tell me that it will begin within a certain period of time. Let's say, the terms en route or they're on their way just means that the mechanism has been put into motion, and I don't know how long that will take.
How many times have you ordered stat dialysis for one of your patients during the year that you were at University of Maryland Hospital?
During the year that I was there, Mr. Allen is the one case that comes to mind immediately.
So he's the only case that you can recall.
He is the most severe case that I can recall.
And how many other less severe cases do you recall where you had to order dialysis on a stat basis for one of your patients while you were at University of Maryland Hospital?
Objection as to form, you can answer.
I don't recall a specific number of times that I had to order stat or request, I'm sorry, not order, request a stat dialysis session.
Is it because it's such a rare request on your part?
Objection as to form, you can answer.
It is a relatively rare request.
Okay. And did you order, well, your answers to interrogatory said that you ordered dialysis on a stat basis, but I think technically you can't order dialysis, correct?
I think on my interrogatories,
Yeah,
I specifically mentioned I requested an urgent or an emergent dialysis session. I don't think I have ever used the words that I ordered myself. Could you point to which interrogatory question that would be?
Sure. Page 7, interrogatory answer number 16. It's at the bottom of that page. It says, quote, Dr. Burks does not recall the exact time that he spoke to a nephrologist on March 18, 2013. Dr. Brooks ordered a stat consultation by a neurologist and stat hemodialysis. That's why that, from what you're testifying here today, it seems to contradict at least the part that you ordered stat hemodialysis. Is the
Correct. I think the statement is meant to say that I ordered a stat consultation, meaning I spoke to directly a nephrologist on a stat basis to request they order dialysis for Mr. Allen.
So you cannot write an order for dialysis?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Now, when you do a stat consultation, is there, do you page the nephrologist on a stat basis? Do you call the office and tell them, this is Dr. Burks, I have a stat consultation, I need to speak to a nephrologist right away? How does that work?
I page through the paging operator.
Okay. And when you page for the stat consultation, do you know how long it took the nephrologist to respond to your page?
In this case, you need.
In this case, yes.
In this case, I don't recall. It's typically less than 5 minutes.
And you think this is typically what happened in this case?
Yes, sir. I don't recall any delay in them responding.
Okay. When you spoke to the nephrologist on the 18th, do you know what time that was? And you can refer to the chart if you need to.
I believe that was based on the timing of my notes and the events. It would be between noon and 1 o'clock p.m.
And do you know the name from the record? Can you figure out the name of the nephrologist that you spoke with?
I want to say Dr. Diamantidis. I'm not sure if she is the was the fellow or Dr. Sana was the attending. I would have spoken to the fellow.
I think Santa was the fellow, actually.
Okay.
And Diamantidis was the attending, if I'm correct,
Right.
Mr. Shaw.
Diamantidis, I think, is the way she pronounces it.
Okay.
So you
We
would
call her Dr. D.
That's fine. Dr. D, did you speak to Dr. D or Dr. Santa?
Did we agree Dr. Sana was the fellow?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Then it would have been Dr. Sana.
Okay. And did he agree with your assessment?
Yes, sir.
And did he tell you that he would be processing your request for hemodialysis on a stat basis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you ask him, Doctor, how long do you anticipate it will be before Mr. Alice can begin dialysis?
I don't recall asking that specific question, no.
Is that something you would have asked in this case?
Likely, yes.
And it would be important for you to know that because other decisions you may have made for the patient's care may depend upon the delay in which dialysis can begin, correct?
Objection is to form. You can answer.
I would say that, well, I guess I'd like you to be more specific as far as what decisions you refer to.
Well, did you change any of, after, you don't recall the time period that Dr. Santa informed you that Mr. Allen could begin dialysis after he agreed to honor your request, correct?
Correct.
Did the time for Mr. Allen to begin dialysis, did that have an impact on any other orders or treatment protocols you planned for him at that time?
No, sir.
Okay. So if Dr. Santa said, I'll be there in 10 minutes, you would have still done everything that you did in this case the same way?
Objection. You can answer.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now,
Can we go off the record for a second? Can we take a short break?
you certainly can.
I'd like to. Don't mind.
Go right ahead.
Going off the record at 11:44 a.m.